Good afternoon. My name is Angela Guadalupe Juanita Reyes Medina Galia, but most folks call me Angie. I am a native Detroiter and a Detroiter by choice. I've lived and worked my entire life in the city of Detroit, and I have the awesome responsibility today of being the voice of community on this panel. So it's impossible for one person to speak for the entire community, whatever you define community as, but I will do the best that I can to give the perspective of being one person from a community who has worked over many years with all three of the universities represented here. I owe my undergrad degree to a community university partnership at Wayne State University, where I attended Chicano-Boricua Studies, which is now the Latin American Studies. And I owe my graduate degree to a partnership with the University of Michigan, to which I owe my master's in public health. So my education, my higher education, is entirely due to the fact that there have been some awesome partnerships over the years between universities and community. My organization that I represent is Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation, which is located in Southwest Detroit, one of the most diverse communities in the state of Michigan. I started the organization 16 years ago from my living room in Southwest Detroit because I was tired of burying children. We had a very high level of violence, and at that time I was going to way more funerals than high school graduations. And over the years, through the process of developing some pretty intense partnerships with a lot of different sectors across the community, including universities, we've been able to reverse that trend where we are now attending way more not only high school graduations, but now college graduations than funerals. So those partnerships are really significant in the everyday life and death of young people in our community. We really work hard at empowering individuals in our community, both youth and parents, to be able to be agents of change in their own families, in their schools, and in their community. And that's our primary role. So I want to talk about both benefits and challenges from a community perspective of partnering with universities. And as I mentioned, there are certainly many benefits, but before we get to the benefits, I want to talk a little bit about what happens historically with the relationship between community and universities. And I'm going to reference a lot the Detroit URC, which Barbara had spoken about, because we are one of those community partners. I've been a partner with the Detroit URC since its founding 17 years ago. And although it's primarily around doing community-based participatory research, I think the methods and the way of us working together is what kind of models what I consider the gold standard of how universities and community work together. Because it's about relationships, regardless of what it is, the focus of that partnership is, it really is about how you develop and maintain those relationships. So historically, there has been a lot of distrust, understandably, between the community and universities. And as Barbara had mentioned, there has been research that has actually done harm to communities. So people in my community, in the city of Detroit, at the very least, are very leery of just about anybody from the outside, but particularly universities coming in to study us. Sometimes we feel like guinea pigs because we get studied so much. So when folks from U of M came to Detroit 17 years ago and said they wanted to establish the Detroit Community Academic Urban Research Center, we said, oh boy, okay, U of M's coming to the city. And we were hoping they would go away, as most people did, but they didn't. They were very persistent. You can see Barbara's still here, 17 years later. So we figured we better be at the table. If they're not going away, then we need to be at the table. And it wasn't because we believed at the beginning that there actually were going to be benefits. It was because if the university was going to be in our community, we wanted to make sure they weren't going to muck things up. We were there as community gatekeepers to protect our community, to make sure that whatever the university was going to do was not going to cause harm to our community. And it took a long time of building trust. We had to make sure that they were going to do what they said they were going to do and how they said they were going to do it before we were able to really build on that relationship and start doing the research, which took at least a year, maybe 2 years of process of really working through developing those relationships of trust. Once we did that, lo and behold, there were benefits, in fact, to the community, some of which Barbara had mentioned. But particularly, I want to talk about benefits and challenges from 3 different perspectives: individual, organizational, and community benefits and challenges. From a personal level, there are a number of different benefits that, that individuals who've been part of this partnership from the community side have been able to benefit from. As I mentioned, education and opportunities for education. Traveling, because all of us have been able to present nationally and attend national meetings and conferences, as well as sit on national committees. I myself have traveled not only all over the United States, but Canada and several countries in Latin America to be able to co-present at several key conferences and trainings. We've been able to give key input in the developing national guidelines for conducting CBPR and reviewing grant applications. There's been numerous opportunities for professional development for all of us at a number of different levels. And as Barbara mentioned, the really deep friendships that have developed over the years between all of the different folks who've been part of this partnership. In 17 years, you have to either really like each other or you're not going to stick around for very long. And we have been through this and seen each other through weddings, divorces, marriages, births, deaths. My standing joke is that this is probably one of the longest relationships in my life, and it's outlasted both of my marriages put together. We've also developed some pretty deep relationships across different organizations and communities. Under the Detroit URC, the work that we've been doing is really one of the longest standing and deepest relationships between the Latino and African American communities in the city of Detroit. That Black-Brown relationship is pretty critical in the United States in this day because of the growth of our populations and where we are in our development. And we have, I think, really created a model of how our communities can work together on some really critical issues and develop some strategies for addressing them that cuts across race, ethnicity, and culture. We've also been able to have access for resources in our organizations that we wouldn't normally have. Most nonprofits, particularly in Detroit in 2013, are in the eye of the storm and we're struggling to survive. So having access to resources that we might not otherwise have is pretty critical. So having student interns who have talents and skills, who are connected to professors who have even more talents and skills, people who can come in and do marketing, they make those brochures that you sometimes don't have. Program evaluation, needs assessment, a number of different things that the university has skill sets and resources that we wouldn't otherwise have access to. Those of us who are in the community who participate in the Detroit URC on the steering committee and the board receive a stipend for our participation, which is really critically important because it acknowledges that our time in the community is just as important as the academics' time, and that one of our most critical resources for community organizations is our time. So even though it doesn't compensate for all the time we spend, I keep joking I need an office here at U of M. I'm waiting for one yet. But it still helps. It helps a lot. And then having the ability to enhance our capacity to conduct research on our own, to really understand what research protocols are, and to be able to move our work forward by having access to researchers. We also know what questions to ask other researchers when they show up and ask for access to our population, and what kind of things to expect from researchers. In terms of the community, there have been numerous benefits to the community, particularly that we have been able to develop programs and interventions that address the community's needs and concerns that they themselves have stated were issues. It wasn't somebody else coming in saying, we would like to research this issue. It's the community saying, this is a concern, this is an issue, we need someone to come in and help us conduct research around this issue. So it's very pertinent to the work that people in the community are doing on a daily basis. We've been able to use a lot of the research findings to make policy recommendations. And I can tell you how much incredibly more stronger, potent it is when you go to a policymaker as a constituent and a scientist, and say, here's the problem, here's the science behind it. Now here are the policy recommendations. It's much more powerful when you have both combined together. Otherwise, we know we know about some of these problems anecdotally, but we don't have the science behind them to really prove them. So it makes a very powerful partnership. And then one of the things that we really pushed for in terms of community benefits were jobs. So in a lot of the cases, a lot of the projects that we have had through the URC we've hired people from the community. They've been trained to conduct various aspects of the research, and many of them either are still working for the different projects or have moved on to other places that have hired them because they have those skill sets now from the community. But there are also challenges. As you can imagine, working across different large institutions can create any number of challenges, also at the individual, organizational, and community level. So on a personal level, again, one of the greatest challenges is demand on time. It takes a tremendous amount of time to work collaboratively with anybody, but especially to work collaboratively with universities, scientists, and researchers, because it takes a long time to do research. And a lot of times you're being pulled in a number of different directions. It can be very frustrating to not sometimes have the capacity after you've gotten the research results to be able to apply those results to something that's happening in your community. Maybe we don't have the funding to be able to really use some of that data, and it might sit on the shelf. And as you know, sometimes that data gets stale pretty quickly, and if you're not using it right away, then it's not applicable anymore. And then the time it takes to carry out all the different multiple roles, as you know the saying, be careful what you ask for. You know, wanting to be involved as an equal partner in doing CBPR means that you have to be at the meetings, you have to review the data, you have to help with its translation, you have to review manuscripts, you have to try to co-author data, you have to be available to co-present. It's very time-consuming. So that strain on all those multiple roles can sometimes be quite a challenge. At the organizational level, there's also similar challenges in terms of the organization, in terms of an opportunity cost. So, for instance, while I'm here today co-presenting, my organization is getting ready for their annual dinner the day after tomorrow, and they're wondering why I'm not there helping them to do some last-minute things. Or if you're attending a meeting that has to do with some research that may not be central to your core mission, could you be spending better time at your office writing a grant for funding for your core mission? And then, which is another challenge, is really finding researchers and academics who are interested in things that pertain to your core mission, whose interests are aligned with your organization's interests and mission, can sometimes be a challenge. A lot of times people don't have the expertise. I've had a very difficult time finding researchers who have an expertise in gang intervention and prevention in the state of Michigan. There are probably, I can count actually on 2 fingers. So it's really difficult to get researchers sometimes who have those areas of expertise. And then, again, being able to put the research into action before it gets old. The community challenge is that a lot of times folks in the community don't really understand what research language and protocols are. So they may want to, for instance, join a walking group, but it already started 3 weeks ago, and they want to know, why can't I join? Because it's a research model, so you can't just join in the middle of it, otherwise you muddy the data, right? So trying to explain that to folks can sometimes be a real challenge, and it doesn't always feel genuine to people in the community. The community is not always responsive or ready to engage in research. There may be a whole lot of challenges for their capacity, and then because of the lack of trust, people may not want to be engaged in any of the research at any level. For instance, in the Latino community in Detroit, we're dealing with issues of immigration because we're a border town. Border Patrol is in our community all the time, and if you have a stranger with a clipboard who knocks on your door, who doesn't look like anybody else who lives in your neighborhood, you're probably not going to answer. So that can be a real issue for folks. So just in closing, I just wanted to mention that the community partners that engage with universities have to live in multiple worlds. Many of us are already bicultural, so we've learned to live between two cultures and two communities. I've told kids who come from our community who are going off to college that it's like going to a different country, because you have people who, they speak differently, they dress differently, they have sometimes different values and a different culture, and you have to be prepared for that cultural shock and learn how to live in this different culture and in a different world and in a different environment. Even though the University of Michigan is only 45 minutes away from Detroit, it's an entirely different world than our community is. So having that understanding, that respect, and honoring those differences and learning to work across them is what makes a good community academic partnership. Thank you.